Hi, I am Niko Roorda and I am an author of books about sustainable development and corporate social responsibility, CSR. My website shows more of my work, which you can find at roorda.nu. That's N-U. Besides, my work consists of assisting universities and other kinds of institutions to integrate future thinking and sustainability within everything that they do. For instance, their education, their research, and their operations. My latest book is about Omniconomics, and I'm going to introduce that concept in the lecture that I'm introducing right now. Actually, this book about Omniconomics is my magnum opus, my main work, the most important thing that I've done before, on which I've worked for years. The book has been published in the fall of 2021 in Dutch, and the English edition is following soon because it will be published in the spring of 22. Well, in November 2021, I was requested by Avans University to present a lecture, the so-called Avans Academic Lecture. Normally this would take place in the main building of the university in the city of Breda, but due to the corona pandemic that was impossible, so it became a webinar. The original of this lecture was in Dutch, but for people outside of the Netherlands I re-recorded this lecture in English, and that's what you're watching right now. After the recording, the video was cut into 4 parts, which I posted as a series of lectures on YouTube, each lasting 10 to 15 minutes. For legal reasons, I have to tell you that the photo credits are placed at the end of the 4th part. There's also a 5th video in which questions are asked by the audience, which I answer. This part is still in Dutch. I can't re-record it, of course, but English subtitles have been added. I wish you lots of inspiration with this lecture. In this lecture I am going to introduce Omniconomics to you, which is a new science that doesn't yet exist and which is to replace and expand economics, as economics does not work for sustainable development, as I will show you. Although I've been working on sustainable development for quite some years now, more than 30 years actually, in which I've done many things like writing textbooks and other books for university students and for main public, this book about Omniconomics is much more important than everything I've done so far, because it goes deeper and more fundamental, explaining why we need a new science that is to replace economics. Let me start by showing you 4 photographs. As you can see, on the left on the top we have a moon landing, the Apollo moon landing actually, and on the right we have a harvest of golden grains. On the bottom, on the left, we have an old lady, which is still really quite alive. And on the right, you see a bank, which is the oldest bank that is still in existence. It dates from the 15th century and it is somewhere in Italy. You can find the details of that bank in the book. Now, the fun is that one of these 4 photographs should not be here because it cannot be compared with the other 3. And so you may wonder which photograph is that, and I will show you how you can find out. First of all, let's go to the moon landing, where you can see a number of successes of physics. Physics is the oldest science, and it has delivered us such things as steam engines, automobiles, movies, the moon landings, there it is, microwave ovens, 3D printers, and much, much more. Of course, this list could be expanded indefinitely. The second one is another discipline, another science, and that's agricultural science. And this science brought us fertilizers and crop breeding and many more things, including nature-inclusive agriculture. And the third one, that's about the medical science. And medical science has enriched our existence with hygiene, anesthesia, and much more, including at the end increasing healthy life expectancy, hence the old, very much alive lady. Finally, on the right you find the economic science, with money, banks, stock markets, etc., etc., including derivatives. Now, one of those four should not be here because it's different from the other three. Any guess? It's economic science, of course, and it's easy to guess because I already told you that this lecture is about economics. But the reason why is perhaps less clear. And this reason is that the things that I mention at the economic science section, like money and derivatives, are not products of economic science. And that's pretty evident because they all are much older than anything that may be called economic science. Money, for instance, is tens of thousands of years old, so it's definitely not a product of an economic science. And the same goes for all the other items that I show you there. In other words, if you try to find a chronological order, it should be this. And that's not all, because it's even worse. Economic science is actually not a science at all. It's a proto-science. And there's a big difference between a proto-science and a real mature science, which I will explain in this lecture. Let me start by explaining you the history of the economic discipline, which started around 1750 with what later would be called the physiocratic school, which was soon followed by the next school, which came to be known as the classical school, founded by Adam Smith, who is considered the father of economics. But that's not all, because soon other branches developed, as you can see here. And that's still not all, because other institutions came into being, other schools, other ways of thinking about economics, starting, for instance, in Germany with the historical school, which soon also arrived in the UK and in France with their own historical schools. And it went on by the institutional school, which you can see has now a lot of different branches. And you can see this is as an example, because comparative lists could also be shown with many other schools. This is just an example. Then in 1945, the coming of monetarism, and next a merger of many schools, as you can see here, in a synthesis. Now you may expect that this synthesis meant that finally all economists agreed about the essence of their science, but not so, because the other schools were still alive very much. So actually what was called a synthesis was just another school. And it didn't stay there, because on the left you had the Neo-Ricardian school, and on the right the Chartalist school, and on the bottom other schools, and on the top still other schools. And there you can see that Karl Marx had following schools by Lenin, Stalin and Mao, and perhaps you may think that those schools, all dealing with communism in the Soviet Union and in communist China, may perhaps be less relevant for economic science, but that is not true, because Marxism also has its schools in the western part of the world, as you can see here. And more schools evolved. And other schools that I could not really easily link on the existing schools, so I just put them in some corners. And overall, this is the image of at least 25 schools in economics that still exist, all have their disciples and the disciples, I'm sorry, and all are very much alive, combating each other, trying each to find the essence of economics. In other words, this is about the image that we have right now. This is also an image representing any science in a phase in which it still lacks a real success, in which many people all think that they find the truth, but they differ hugely in what those truths might be. Here's an example. For instance, at some date, some persons may find, hey, listen, we took all those green parts and look, we could easily fit them together. So now we have founded the School of Economics. But then other people arise and they say, no, listen, it's different. You should take the blue parts and glue them together, and including also a few black parts, which actually don't exactly fit, as you can see, but that doesn't matter. This is the truth. We have founded the true economics. And then, of course, still another school arises, the yellow school, which claims that they have found the truth. For instance, they may be the institutional school, and the green school may be the ecological school in economics, and probably the largest of them is the neoclassical school, which is the dominant school right now in all of our universities all over the world, and in the government thinking about economics in nearly all countries. But that's not all, because after some time many other schools also arise, each claiming that they have found the solution for economics, but usually they don't agree on very fundamental issues. If you have genuine science, then this starts with some common ground in which a part of the puzzle has been solved, as you can see in this image, and then you have a fundament that is agreed by all and is trying to form an edifice, a theoretical framework from which people can work on the expansion of that framework. As you can see, around the borders of this common ground, there are still many pieces that don't yet fit, but that's the usual thing. And if science then succeeds in getting further, then you get something like this, but still, of course, there are many pieces to be fit yet on the framework, because people haven't found how they should fit. This is typical for any science, any advanced science, in which probably even more pieces are not yet fitting than in the beginning phase, which you can see here, because probably there are now in the advanced science more puzzles to be solved, because if you know more, you can also ask more. Here's an overview of those three stages of science. Starting with a proto-science, which is still partly in a domain of magical thinking, perhaps even religious thinking, and also philosophical thinking, which then may evolve into a young science and eventually into an advanced science. And I'll give you a few examples of that. For instance, the oldest advanced science, now advanced science, was born in the 17th century, that's physics and astronomy, followed by chemistry in the 18th century, etc., as you can see here. A few examples of young science are shown on the right, such as these. And then, of course, there is, as I mentioned, a proto-science of economics. Now you may wonder, why is economics still a proto-science? Can you prove that? Yes, I can and I will. First, the fact that this is a proto-science is very serious I will also prove during this lecture and in more detail in the book that the consequences of economics being a proto-science are very, very grave. Climate change is one of those consequences, and I'll explain why. But you know the consequences of climate change, and one of those consequences is we have seen this, unfortunately, in the last few years, where huge bushfires, forest fires, were to be found all around the world, even in the most cold places like Siberia. And this is only becoming more severe, as we know, because at the moment we are on the way to climate change at the end of this century of 3 degrees up, which is twice as much as we can afford, because our climate scientists tell us that we are to limit climate change and the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, or else it will be really disastrous.